Hello and welcome to Intuitive Journey with Desiree. I'm Desiree Holmes Scherini, your host, and welcome to part two of a conversation with Joe Turiano and I about spiritual narcissists. And if you didn't see part one, please just go watch part one, but it's not necessary to part two. And also, please go to my interview with Joe about him and his work and his book. So, you want to know more about Joe, please do that. In the meantime, we're going to kind of carry on a conversation about narcissists, gurus gone bad, and how narcissists and cult leaders, it seems narcissism seems to be a prerequisite for becoming a cult leader. So um, I'm going to jump back into a refresher on where I left off. I was talking about the traits of narcissist, and I have all these very unorganized notes, um, and spiritual narcissists. So, like I say, the descriptions overlap. So they're charismatic and persuasive, authoritarian and controlling. They have a need for admiration, a lack of empathy. They can be delusional and unpredictable. Uh, Exploitive for personal gain, including financial, sexual, or emotional exploitation. They don't have much tolerance for questioning or challenging, and they will punish by exclusion, cutting you off, or other forms of silent treatment, etc., so forth. And they will give you sort of a it's us versus them sort of message, and that can and also narcissists may include spiritual abusers. So, which is kind of funny because that, ties in. So they will, an individual narcissist will do the same thing as a, cult leader to really give you that feeling that they do the love bombing, how special you are, and how, when you're with them, you're very, very special, and other people really don't understand, and you need to be with them because they're the only one who, to follow, take care of you. We're just going to pick up on that conversation a little bit. And I have a list of some prime examples that maybe the names are familiar to you and maybe they're not, but I'll just kind of go through them. There was John of God. He was like amazing, right? He was down there in Brazil, and he would proclaimed medium and self-proclaimed psychic surgeon. Okay, and famous people went down to work with him, people that were trusted in their own right. I think I remember Wayne Dyer visited him for some healing. Mm-hmm. And he was, I believe, maybe the Oprah show, CNN, ABC News covered his work. His actual name was, and I'm sure I'm going to say this wrong because it's Brazilian, Yao Teixeira de Faria. Anyway, I'm sure I said that wrong, but I won't go into all the details. But if I really went down the rabbit hole, and it was fascinating reading about these people. So if you just Google John of God and find out more, and he didn't take money for his services, yet his services said you need to do this, this, and this to be healed. And then he was the one who sold the products, or you had to pay where and stay where, in his place and have the nursing and all that, and that was paid for. So that's where he made most of his money. He would do road shows and events. And then eventually it was found out that he was abusing women and taking advantage, doing that, not just spiritual abuse, but physical abuse. And a quote from his daughter, she supported the accusers, calling her father a monster and alleging that she was beaten and raped by him as well until she ran away at 14. So there always seems to be, with some of these, like this dark side that may never be found out. One that I thought was interesting because I don't remember hearing so much bad stuff, but that was a whole really interesting rabbit hole was L. Ron Hubbard. And the he was an American author and the founder of Scientology. Uh, he actually was in a facility for schizophrenia when he was young. So also some of these spiritual cult leaders, don't get me in trouble saying cult with because they're still very active. But some of these spiritual leaders often have, something a little loose up there that gives them that delusional, like I'm special um, feeling. He had a revelatory near-death experience in 1941. He was in the Navy briefly, and then he got involved with Jack Parsons, and that's a whole other story. Um, and in something called Babylon Working Sex Magic, also tied to Aleister Crowley. So, kind of going into that magical thinking and power. It wasn't like to, wish the world well. It was like a power trip. Really fascinating. He's he stole the guy. He's staying with Jack Parsons and stole his girlfriend, and then they borrowed money and ran off and never paid it back. So it's like he doesn't have a really good history as far as doing the right thing. Um, his first wife wrote to Sarah, a warning saying Ron is not normal. Um, your charges probably, so she charged him with something. Your charges probably sound fantastic to the average person, but I've been through it. The beatings, threats on my life, all the sadistic traits you charge, 12 years of it. Um, he announced that he discovered a new science, of course, only he could, right? Um, and it promised a chance to achieve godlike powers in a state called operating that. Anyway, I could go on and on. I'm not going to. However, he used to joke that he was the Prince of Darkness, and he opened a spiritual guidance centers. So there we go. It just kind of started to snowball. He found his niche. He had a hard time in the beginning and wrote books to support here and there, and kind of couldn't find ways to make a solid living and make money. And then he found his way, and money, power, being idolized. He also encouraged members to disconnect from any organization or individual, including family members, deemed to be disruptive or suppressive. Scientologists were also required to write knowledge reports on each other, reporting transgressions or misapplication of Scientology methods. He promulgated a long list of punishable misdemeanor crimes and high crimes. So within the organization, if you belong, it just it began to be more and more stringent and requiring more of the members, and also providing them a sense the further you got into the organization, the more special you are and the more powers you'll get. Um, anyway, he there's just more. I'll go on to David Miscavige, who is the current leader of the Church of Scientology. There are allegations made against him, and they include claims of human trafficking, child abuse, slavery, forced separation of family members, coercive fundraising practices, harassment of journalists and Scientology critics, and emotional and physical abuse of subordinates. And he's pretty easy to find a lot of stuff on by people that have left the organization and have talked about him. Let me see if I want to. Let me take a break right there. There's more to go through. How, Joe, on just on the few that I've mentioned, it seems like there's a pattern.
Mhm.
There's a pattern, like sometimes people start with the best of intentions or simplicity, and then they get this taste of power,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Um, so I'll continue on this list after I engage in some conversation with you, instead of let you sit there silently. So, you have any thoughts on, hearing about these few guys right now?
Yes, it is a pattern, and occasionally you'll see certain historical examples. Maybe when the Catholic Church was the most powerful organization in the world, you will see certain people who basically had bad intentions from the beginning. They
Yeah.
were just about power. They were just about money. They were just about themselves straight off the bat, no pretense. Pretty much, it's just there, and you can see it, including someone like Cardinal Richelieu, if you want to look him up. Very
Um,
interesting figure. Um, Perpetrated essentially many different aspects of the 30 Years' War. People say led to the deaths of 4 to 8 million people, including by starvation, all these things. It was just a kind of naked power grab. And there was no moral justification for it whatsoever, pretty much. But he was just about that. He was from a rich family who put him in there. If the first son who was put into that position by his family said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a powerful cardinal who pulls strings and tries it. And he became a monk to try and defy his family. So they moved this other son in there and he just stepped in, and everybody knew, even the other members of the church knew that this dude is no good. But he was extremely successful in the things that he did. But those people are pretty unusual. Most of the other people who we're talking about here, I think more or less, and historically you can see this pattern, they start out basically with good intentions, sometimes a little bit of a mix of intentions, but it is as if the success goes to their head. And that's something we can all think of. I mean, maybe if we're becoming successful in various areas, it's like we could start believing our own hype, reading our own press clippings, start saying, "Oh yeah, look at me. I can do this. I have this ability. People think I'm great. People say I can do this." Maybe some of these people have real psychic ability. You talk about John of God. I remember having a client who came to me. He wanted to go study with him. This kid had a certain capacity for this. He wanted to learn with this guy, and I believe that probably some of what this guy was doing was legit. But at the same time, any ability that you have can go to your head if you allow it to. It's like this increasing sense of entitlement that you get with the
mhm.
fact that you're succeeding and other people are saying so, and they're saying, you look at your abilities in comparison with these others. You must be special. You must be awesome. You can talk to people. They believe you. You have charisma. You have
Yeah.
psychic capacities. And then, at some point, people, if they don't check themselves, which unfortunately a number of them don't, they say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, yeah, I should be able to do this stuff. Yeah, I'm better than these people. Yeah, I should. And as a matter of fact, I deserve more. I deserve more than these people. I should take what I can get because, yeah, I'm great. As a matter of fact, I think I'm chosen by God for this. And
Yes,
it's
and they
awesome.
say that. I heard a voice, and I'm the one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That goes with it. It is, I mean, and there are genuine mystical experiences that often lead people to these things. I believe they really happen. But then sometimes it's like when you've been through that type of experience, and I've been through that type of experience, maybe you've been through that type of experience. If you have these type of experiences, you have to ask questions later, and you have to continue to be able to check yourself in terms of your sense of entitlement and saying, look, you could be in this incredibly awesome state of inspiration. You can have magical things happening around you. You can get certain insights and psychic downloads and all sorts of other things. But when it's all over with, you don't want to stay in this space or be in this space or go into this space where it's like, yeah, well, I'm so great. Isn't this awesome? This happened to me. Like, yeah, it's happened to many, 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 many people. And when you're in it, you can think, well, oh yeah, well, I'm really important. Well, nobody's any more important than anybody else. We're all important in our own lives to the degree that we're important. But some people get this sense like, oh, I'm the savior of humanity, and I'm the most important, and I'm gonna, you know, fight the forces of darkness and fend them off and defeat them and all that sort of thing. And that exact dualistic thought process is what leads them to this sense of arrogant entitlement and leads to destructive thinking and actions because
Hmm.
they don't check themselves. They don't want to check themselves.
Yeah, or they, you know, like you said, especially a lot of these, leaders. Um, would get feedback from the people that adore them,
Hmm.
that follow them. And so it not just their own mind saying I am so important, but they're like, oh, everybody thinks I'm amazing. I
Hmm.
am amazing, therefore, and so they it feels so good. They
Hmm.
perpetuate that. They're like, and then they believe it, and then they take advantage of it. Like you say, they get it's they go to the point where there's that tipping point where they're not just saying, "Oh, thank you," yes, I want to be here, I want to help you. To well, I think it should be this way,
Hmm.
and therefore that's the way it's going to be. Taking away or trying to take away, and often succeeding, um, the individual's own, choices, and the individual gives it up to them
Hmm.
because their trust is so strong with this
Yeah, and
leader
it
or
is
this
interesting.
narcissist.
It is interesting in a sense that certain people are so willing to give that away.
Yeah, that's the other
And
side of the
part
equation.
of the temptation with that, and part of what propagates this sort of thing, is the fact that people love to believe the hype about certain things. And once they consider themselves a member of a certain group, or they say this is what I believe in, or they side with the hype that's behind something, then
Mm-hmm.
then they like to say, "Oh, well, this is good. It's awesome. It's great. It's like, of course I believe in it. Of course I back it. Of course I can't think critically about it. Of course I'm not going to question it.
Right.
This is my loyalty. This is what I have to side with. Of course, right? But that, in a way, comes from this sense of maybe not wanting to ask questions and live with the doubt of saying, well, maybe I'm not right. Maybe I need to, consider different aspects. Maybe I need to figure out, some questions or the answers to questions at a deeper level where I just can't accept somebody else spoon feeding me something and say, well, this is what God wants you to believe. And so,
Yeah.
here, yeah, take this dogma and this will get you into heaven and you'll be with the good people and all this sort of thing. This is the
Yeah.
side you need to take. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't want to say like, oh, okay, maybe I need to think for myself. That's a
That's
daunting thing for a lot of people. They don't want to do that. And it's something I think that is pertinent to these times that we live in too, because to some extent, I mean, you said, and we can talk about this later, but we have all this technology. We have AI now. We have all these things coming along, and it's making things easier in a certain sense. Now you can tell AI to write a paper for you. You can say, have it do this or think that out. To some extent, some people are going to use that to a point where they're not going to ask any questions. They're just going to ask AI, "Hey, what do you think, AI? What's this about?" Oh, okay, I'll believe this. It's like your critical thinking capacity will atrophy. You'll just be kind of like in this state where you're like, "Okay, all right, yeah,"
mm-hmm.
and you'll be less educated, even though you have this thing in front of you that can give you all this information. In the greater sense, you'll be less educated because you won't be able to consider different perspectives for yourself.
Yeah, and I'm perfect place to insert the AI because that's not even something. I appreciate you bringing up history because these people have been around. That pattern is from the beginning of time. I'm sure even Neanderthals had the guys,
Mhm.
and they're like, "Oh, you're the guy," and but AI is so interesting in this conversation because this is about spiritual narcissists, gurus. We are putting so much trust in AI and the information without checking it ourselves. Just like, we talk about mainstream media, the news organizations, or what you read, and it must be true. It used to be, I remember, I'm old enough to say, I remember if it was printed in a newspaper, or somebody said it on the news, that there was, very, not much less likely to be a lie, right? Much less likely not to be factual as to, what happened. And now it's, I find if I see something, I go, okay, let me go look at some other sources. And then find, especially with AI on, say, Instagram or YouTube or whatever, well, I saw him. His mouth was moving. He said this, right?
Okay.
and they can take somebody and make them speak. So I'm just saying if the false information's out there,
Okay.
and but it's so trusted because it's a high intelligence. It's
Well,
there
that
was yeah,
yeah,
there was a
people don't
story
want to. They don't
recently.
want to question it because it's just, hey, look, it's awesome. Like it's
Yeah,
just
and it takes so much work to
more
go look it
smarter
up.
than I am, but it's not.
And
It's not.
how do you know where to look it up? Because where you look it up is also an AI. But Google or whatever, the resources are, where do you go? But there was when AI, first started getting used, even like a couple of years ago, there was a story about a reporter, I think it was, put out a story with references, like this reference, that reference. And it was either a paper or a reporter, might have been a medical paper. Nonetheless, it was something where there were references, to it. And they found out that the reporter did not write this, that it wasn't their own writing. They checked the references. The references didn't exist. They were made up references by AI. So, like, it invented references to whatever studies or organizations that weren't real. AI created them to support the story that it had manufactured. Um, as an example, with the whole AI thing, um, and this is not so much like the narcissism, but there are AI counselors,
Mhm.
therapists. And they see, the AI takes in whatever information you give it,
All right.
and is almost, just like talking to yourself in the mirror in a way.
Some extent, depending on who
Yeah.
programs it and which one you're using. Yeah.
And it depends on, is it going to bring in a completely opposite point of view from what you're saying? Here's my, this is what's happening, I'm a victim or whatever. Is it going to say, yes, you're a victim and you're right? Or is it going to say, no, you're full of it, the other person's right? You know? And so I think it can be self-perpetuating and maybe not objective when someone's using AI. I
And
don't
it
know.
depends. Yeah, I mean, it depends on sometimes it depends on what platform you're using and what you know about it, which most people don't do the research, just like you said. Depends on what type of question you ask. So it can come up with some interesting things. But then
Mhm.
again, we're talking about here, understand what's going on. I asked AI the other day, I said, give me a set of philosophical ideas that are explored in the film Cool Hand Luke. I got a message back in 5 seconds. It was very interesting. And I sat and read that. I was like, this is really interesting. I'm glad I could get that. But I know AI didn't go in and watch the film Cool Hand Luke. It went into the cloud and got a whole bunch of other people's work, kind of
Right.
sifted through it, spit it back out at me. And that's nice. That's interesting. And those other people didn't get credit for their work, but it's still, I still found it, thought-provoking and valuable. But, I could say like, wow, isn't that awesome that AI could sit there and think that up that quick? But that's not what happened. That's not what it did. And most people don't understand that.
Mhm.
So and the other thing that people don't understand too is AI only essentially does what it's programmed to do, and the people who
Yeah.
program it different ways. So sometimes, and there are all these different cases that people talk about now. For example, Elon Musk's AI, it's called Grok, just within this past week, put out some answers to certain things, saying it wasn't, Hitler was a great guy and he had some awesome ideas, and yeah, just to say, and then they went back, the programmers went back and said, no, 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 we got to get this out. So now it's out. Apparently, won't say that now. But AI will say some weird things, off the wall things now and again, because it's this kind of thing where there are these loose programming, guidelines, and it will go in and get this information that's already out there, but it won't always come through with what they expect. And it's not thinking for itself, it's not making decisions, but it's somewhat unexpected what will come out. And part of what you're saying there, it's like it can be like a guru in that a lot of people who program AI, they will program it to tell the person who's using, you're awesome,
Yeah.
you're special, you're wonderful, you're great, you're going to get everything you want out of life, and you're one of the chosen ones. There are all these things. I saw this thing. It was in one of my ad feeds on one of the I don't know, something. But anyway, it said AI will draw a picture of your soulmate and these kind
Oh
of.
yeah, that always comes
Yeah,
across.
it's this kind of thing. Here's one. This came out. Somebody talked about an answer they got. They put into the AI. They said, you know what? I feel like a superhero. I think I'm going to drink some cyanide,
Yeah,
and I know it won't kill me. And the AI said, yeah, you are a superhero. You go get it.
go for it. Well, you know
Yeah,
what? That could be AI might be programmed to do a favor to humanity and get rid of stupid people. I don't know. I'm kidding.
ah, some
If
people,
you can
as a
drink
matter of fact,
cyanide, just saying, no,
that's
don't
one of the
try it.
doubts of certain
I know.
people, which is somewhat legit. I mean, like things, that if somebody programs it a certain way, could AI start to put
Yeah.
in
Well,
strategies to get
there
rid of
have
it? Sure.
I think word of mouth did hear uh, a story about AI. Um, a kid, a teenager, or whatever, was talking to AI, and feeling suicidal, and AI was like, go for it. It was. You're like, no, you're not being helpful. So yeah, you people just really need to think for themselves,
All right.
discern and step back when they're giving up their trust. And part of it, like you say, when we talk about allegiance, um, say to whatever overarching cult or group or leader, that there's two things. You could be lazy, that you're like, I don't want to deal with having to think about this. I just want to trust this person's going to do all the thinking for me. um and so that's like, I'm just, that's it. It's black and white, and this person is the
Mm.
one I'm going to follow. This is my ideology, and I'm not going to stop to think why,
All right.
or to readjust or step back and look at it objectively.
All right.
uh, it's just easier that way, and some people see that as faith, as allegiance, as especially when we're talking about spiritual narcissists or cults,
Yeah.
that that's it, that's all, and you're wrong if you even, and then this is the thing with the cult leaders, will tell you you're wrong to question it, right? Or one of them, and I'll get to him, said, you don't have to stay, you don't have to be here, you can go if you want, um, but if you leave, then you're not part of us anymore. You
Yeah.
could, you couldn't have it both ways.
All right.
You either with us or you're not. And, and then a lot of people did leave. I'll get to him. Uh, but let me, I'm going to grab the list, go through it some more. Then we had Jim Jones. He was, led the People's Temple, and he's the one who orchestrated the mass suicide of over 900 followers in Jonestown, Guyana in 1978. Um, and again, going back to, like we mentioned, Hubbard was in a hospital for schizophrenia for a while, and got out of there and moved on with his life. Um, but his neighbors reported that he was an unusual child who was obsessed with religion and death
Mm.
when he was young. So he kind of, he was an interesting one. And once again, he claimed to have unique abilities. Um, and he had then we go to, he had an allegiance to the Pentecostal church,
Mhm.
which is, I don't know much about it, but I think they're the ones that handle snakes and believe that they are
Oh,
immune to uh, some things. And he wanted to be a preacher. Anyway, he had a frequently emotionally and psychologically abused his wife, Marceline, I'm sorry. So again, we've got somebody who on his interpersonal relationship was abusive and controlling, uh, and then manages to lead 900 people to trust him.
oh,
Um, anyway, the followers engaged in communal lifestyle. They turned over their income and their property to Jones and to the People's Temple, where he directed everybody's life. That's it. And so there's an example, just hand it over. We'll just follow you, to our deaths. He was, you brought up Hitler. He became a voracious reader and studied Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, and Mahatma Gandhi. That's an interesting combo, right? Um, he rejected traditional Christianity and began promoting a form of anti-capitalism, et cetera, and so forth. Anyway, he later taught that he was a manifestation of Christ, the revolution, and he became progressively controlling over his followers. Yeah. So again, there's that example of, he wanted to be a preacher. He started out, like, I want to be a preacher. Mm-hmm. And it turned into, all-encompassing power and tell people, to drink the Kool-Aid, literally.
Part of it, if you study the progression of the way things happen with him, I mean, he was definitely one of those people, and this is classic. They just get worse. They get worse. The more success they have, the worse they become. And he actually had this stretch where he was recognized by a lot of people because he was a social activist, and he rode with the Freedom Riders, Martin Luther King, those people. He later was recognized for his work with the poor in San Francisco.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rosalind Carter went and met with him. People, who are well known,
right.
recognized him. But the further on he went, it was because he aligned himself with this cause. He said, I'm the Christ of this revolution. So he became increasingly paranoid. And so that's a part of the reason why, he has to leave the country, create this alternative society. And so he starts to become afraid that someone's coming for him, right? And that's what actually happened. This group, including some politicians, Congress people, went down and explored what was going on down there in Guyana. And because he was so paranoid, he felt like these people have come here to get me. They're going to get me. They're going to get me. We have to kill them. And he did.
Yeah, they moved around several times until they ended up in Guyana. Right.
I mean, if he had just left them alone, let them observe what they're going to observe, and he said, no, they're going to destroy me. They're going to get me. Look at her. They're out to get us. These are the forces of darkness. These people are evil. We have to kill them. And he did. And it's this just continuing or progressive degeneration into extremes of paranoia, where you sit and think about, who's out to get you and who's against you and who's the force of darkness out there that's going to drag you under, and how are they calculating, to destroy everything that I'm associated with, because I'm the good, they're the bad, all that kind of thing. Yeah, and so that with that comes that entitlement as well. And apparently he's sexually abusing different people under his care. Mm-hmm. He's totally taking over their lives in increasing ways, where it's just everything you do must be under his auspices. It has to be done his way. The whole entirety of it, until it becomes this thing where he just tells them to kill themselves, and a lot of them do.
Yeah, a whole lot of them, 900. Yeah, and you mentioned, and what's weird about a lot of these people, like John of God, L. Ron Hubbard, Jim Jones, you mentioned that he was involved, in the 70s with a lot of political, people, charitable things, and he was the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission in 1975. So this is the problem with, people will have this, we think, oh no, not them. They're not, look at them. They are respectable parts of our society. They have, so it leads to not questioning.
It reminds me, even, it's not exactly real, but it's very, very similar to people. They say, like, this person's a musical star, or this person's a famous actor. They couldn't possibly be doing anything wrong. They
or a politician.
They couldn't be guilty of whatever it is they're guilty of. Oh, here they come. Oh, this is like oh, I'll kiss their feet because they're so famous and they're so talented.
Yeah.
Oh, they're superior to everybody else around them. So how could I possibly think that they could ever, be anything less than something akin to God himself, that kind of thing.
And especially if they believe it themselves, like they walk around like, hey, I am it. And they, especially when they, we think of Diddy, right?
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
in the trial, and he's very big on himself,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
Very, very big on himself. And so many people around him and know him. And so we also there's also that question of like, well, with all those people, somebody would have said something if that person was doing something wrong, right? Like this guy, he got 900 people to commit suicide. No, none of those people said anything. Maybe one or two, and maybe that's why he got
Few
checked out.
did. A few did. His own son turned against him and escaped the whole thing, but very
They,
few.
right?
Very few. Yeah.
Sort of like John of God's daughter, ran away at 14. But he was continuing on his thing, and she, people will, when somebody's that powerful, the dissenting voice is like, well, you have a beef with them, that's your problem. Obviously it can't be true, right? um, Also, something interesting about with his wife Marceline, who he would abuse, note that she was Methodist and he encouraged her to become an atheist. So like this guy was all over the map. He wanted to be a preacher, right? And then he was, and then he I guess he really probably developed, I don't know, those attitudes with his reading and stuff. So he moved out wanting to be a preacher to encouraging her to be an atheist. But um, although he had always been a Bible reader and religious himself, carrying a book around, the Bible around with him in his earlier days. Um, so he, and then of course he decides that he is the Christ of revolution. So an atheist who now decides he's Christ, right? It's like, yeah, and that's the thing. He can be whatever he wants to be, and if he says so, it must be true. Um, the other comment that I want to make on these is, you brought up Hitler, and he's reading Hitler. Is that there's the issue is that it's very difficult sometimes for someone who gets sucked in to stop and discern, because they're not absolutely black and white. They're not absolutely good and evil.
Correct. That's correct.
They have some good that draws you in. Okay. And so, with Hitler, apparently he had some positive ideologies for the country, but he had some other ideologies that were obviously pretty horrible.
Well,
And,
some
and
people
that's
have said this, and I believe it to be a constructive thing. If rather than just accepting this general teaching, well, oh, Hitler was, he just was an evil man who wanted to take over the world. If you really go and dig deeper and understand his history and why he thought the way he did, what you come to understand is many people could come to the conclusions that he did. I think he was wrong in the conclusions he made, but you can understand why there were some reasons why he had. In other words, he was a he was a soldier. He was decorated for bravery. He was in the trenches at World War One. World War One was ended by the German government at the time, which was a socialist government. The socialist government essentially said, we're going to surrender. And some people would say, well, they didn't have a choice, but they didn't hold the line in terms of surrender. Essentially, they said, we're just going to surrender. What do you want us to do? The Allies said, well, here's part of what we want you to do. We want you to pay for the war. We want you to pay war reparations. We want you to pay for the bullets we use to shoot you. So shoot your soldiers. So yeah, pay us all this money and we'll punish you for all this and we'll blame you for it. And they act like it's all your fault when it wasn't all Germany's fault. It was all of their faults at once.
interesting.
There was not, and if you're really objective about it, there was not a country in that conflict that had the moral high ground. They just all went to war because they were scared of the other side, and there was this convoluted system of treaties. But they all wanted to act like, oh, we're fighting for freedom and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it was
Right.
lies. It was lies. But he said, after the war was over and the world went into a depression. Germany did a lot worse than a lot of countries because they were paying war reparations and such. So he developed this thought process where he felt like him and his comrades had been stabbed in the back, and Germany was being persecuted by forces of evil, and that's paranoia, and you should never accept
Mhm.
that thought process. But were there some reasons why he
Right.
felt that way that were essentially based in some truth? Yes, that's correct. As a matter of fact, there were American politicians at the time when the Treaty of Versailles was signed who said this is a guarantee there's going to be another war. They said Hitler was not even to be thought of at that time. This is 1918. They
Oh,
said
wow.
this guarantees there will be another war because this treaty is so onerous that the German people are never going to accept it over the course of time. They're going to turn against us, and it's going to be on again. And they were right.
And you know what? Down a whole nother rabbit hole that was probably on purpose from the powers that be that benefit from war. Um, that like make sure that this happens again so we can, have some more, make money on both sides. That's a different rabbit hole.
Well,
But
that's
people,
out there sometimes.
was it the Rockefellers um, financed Germany and the U.S. in World War II? Uh,
Hmm. Oh,
because you can't lose them. You can't
okay.
lose both. They were like, my money's over here and I'm going to put some money on that horse too. And anyway, interesting rabbit hole, but that's another story. How about Charles Manson? And he's pretty well known, and there's so many interesting stories about him. Um, on a side note, if anyone's interested in finding out more about how he ties into government and politics and some high strangeness there, check out the book Chaos. Fascinating, fascinating stuff about that era involving Charles Manson. And it's not just about him, but it revolves quite a bit around him, the CIA, some experimentation, and and a lot about his history. But here's a thread. Manson began studying Scientology while he was incarcerated. Um, so he started out, he was responsible. He never actually, I don't think, as far as they can say, actually did any of the murders, but he was found responsible for several murders. He had a tumultuous childhood and youth, and he was in and out of correctional facilities, offenses like theft, homosexual rape. He was deemed aggressively antisocial. However, he did marry and fathered a child, um, and ended up back in prison for breaking parole, except for he was just had lots of problems. Okay, and then he was in there long enough that he asked not to be released, um, because that was he felt, I guess, happy, comfortable, controlled there, whatever. But he was, and I won't go into all the details, but he began preaching his own philosophy based on a mixture of, quote, Stranger in a Strange Land, which is a book, the Bible, Scientology, Dale Carnegie, and the Beatles. Okay. And he was actually friends with one of the Beach Boys, and they actually sang one of his songs on one of their albums, and then that relationship soured, and interesting, like, history with that whole Hollywood music uh, thing going on with him there. So he began studying Scientology while he was in prison with the help of fellow inmate Lanier Rayner, and Lanier, and in July 61 listed Scientology as his religion. Um, anyway, he targeted individuals for manipulation who were emotionally insecure. So that's another common thread. People looking for somebody, to rescue them emotionally, or to, tell them that whole love bomb thing, saying, yeah, you're special and I love you and we're together. It's us against the world, right? He attempted to reprogram his followers' minds to submit totally to his will, and he used unconventional sexual practices. Okay, he wanted to turn his followers into, quote, empty vessels that would accept anything he poured, unquote. Um, He also, used drugs and like so he would have these parties with them and encourage them to take LSD and other drugs, and while they were under, but he wouldn't take them himself. So he would stay in control and keep his wits about him. Um, and so his trick was to get people to submit. So, again, an example, a few people have had like weird childhoods, problems in their youth, like he did. And, maybe they were pre-programmed, as kids to just keep going the wrong direction. I don't think there's too many of these examples that had like, normal mom and pop upbringing.
That's correct. Yeah, most of them have disturbed childhoods and yeah, some. Well, a lot of them, yeah. I mean, if you were to, have them be psychoanalyzed in various ways, there'd be a lot of DSM-5 categories would come up for a number of them.
Yeah,
And
obviously. Yeah.
such.
It,
Interesting though. I mean, some, yeah. This wasn't on your list, but if people are looking for something to watch where they would learn something, there's a fascinating documentary. I believe it's 5 parts. It's on Netflix. It's called Wild Wild Country. It's about
okay.
the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who was also known as Osho. Um, a lot of people, well, some people may be familiar with the story, some not. Started out in India. He actually, before he became what some people would call a cult leader or some people would call a guru, um, he was a philosophy professor in India. And being a philosophy professor, he had a lot of Indian ideas, Native Indian ideas, and a lot of Western ideas. And
Right.
he evolved this thought process and apparently had a legitimate mystical experience. After that, became a guru and gathered a bunch of people around him and began to teach these people and created a kind of alternative society, first in India, then for various reasons. And he did do some good and he did do some things that were very questionable. Eventually, he left India. Essentially, the authorities there were after him, and he would say, "Well, they're out to get me." There were reasons why they were. He established this commune in Oregon. They bought this piece of land.
Hmm.
That's basically what this documentary covers, and some of what happened in association with this is just it's amazing. Essentially, he had this woman who was his secretary, who was very different from him. And he was teaching people, and sometimes to this day, you can look on YouTube, he'll have certain speeches. People like this stuff. They find it, educational. They find
Hmm.
it to help inspire them. But the one thing that he did, which I think you do have to question for certain, he had 100 Rolls-Royce automobiles apparently by the end.
Uh-huh.
He had
That
these
sounds spiritual.
yeah, he would draw these rich people to him, and they bought him I'm sorry, $1 million Rolex encrusted with platinum and diamonds.
Gosh.
And actually, I know someone who studied with him. I'm not sure it was in India or Oregon, but this guy was defending him, saying he just did this as a kind of thing. But if you watch the documentary and you talk to people who knew him, he just had this thing where he liked things. He liked shiny things. So he liked
Apparently.
riches and all this sort of thing. And that was part of his thought process was somewhat corrupted by some of the ideas that he chose to adopt, basically based on his philosophical outlook on life. He felt like most of the Indian teachers of the classic way, well, they were hostile to life because Nietzsche said, "Oh, you're hostile to life." So I want money, sure I want sex, sure I want all these things, and I'm not going to observe what I'm doing, whether this is taken away from somebody else or it's selfish or it's narcissistic. I'm just going to take it because I want it. Um, a lot of the really, really unethical things, though, apparently there's evidence that he knew about them, but he didn't necessarily perpetrate them. His secretary actually did certain things. There are a number of things. And if you watch the documentary, you'll see it. She attempted to murder a number of people. She took salmon. They had a bioweapons kind of
Wow.
on this compound.
Uh-huh.
It had all these it had salmonella and botulism and all these other things. She
My
took
gosh.
she took salmonella out into the town because there was this political conflict that was evolving. She put salmonella in all the salad bars in the town. A bunch of people got sick, and she did just certain things. You're just like, wow. She bought, there's another thing. It was going to be this election. So they knew it would be like based on vote. So she went out to, and this is kind of a cynical move. She went out to LA and picked up as many homeless people as she could, took them up to the compound and said, yeah, you can live here as long as you vote. And then so these people voted in this election and they swung the direction of the power. So it'd be in the area of the Rajneeshis. And she just did things. You're just amazed. And she's still around, by the way. He died, but she wasn't quite like him. She was like his second in command. And sometimes people, that's part of the interesting thing too. People like this will sometimes have people behind them. They're not so much into their own charisma. It's like they're more the true believer. They're the ones like, this is the cause, so I'll do anything for it. And they can be some of the most ruthless. I mean, they'll basically do almost anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they believe so strongly that, like, well, this person's in the way of this progressing, so they've got to go,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, they'll do it.
and I think I did see at least a part of that story. I don't think I've seen the documentary, but I do remember that they had a commune,
Mhm.
and they took people in to vote,
Mhm.
and somehow, swung it so that I guess they were in charge
No,
of.
and it was a conflict that was developing between because there was a small town that was near this commune that
Mhm.
they created in Oregon, and they
Right.
they basically made their commune into a town unto itself. But there was this kind of conflict that was coming up between the people who were there who didn't like the Rajneeshis. So
Yeah.
the Rajneeshis said, "Well, this is racism, and this is this, and this is that." But really, like a lot of the things they were doing, at least a number of them, were really questionable.
Apparently.
There was reason why these people had
Uh,
something against them because they were not. This is kind of going straight down the line. When he was in India and when he came to Oregon, he just said, you know what, we're not going to adhere to the laws so much. We're not going to adhere to the normative things, normative values of
right.
society. We're just going to do what we want to do. And you know, you got to be really careful if you have that kind of attitude in life or whatever else. It's like that thing where I was saying before, we got to check ourselves. We all do. We ought to like have this thing in us where we're willing to check our own actions rather than just say, yeah, I can do this. I want to do this. Yeah, I feel like I'm entitled to do this. And if anybody says nothing or says something to me, then I'll say, well, it's your fault, or you're out to get me.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
not being fair with me. Sometimes people have a right, or sometimes people are in the right in questioning us in
Yeah.
certain ways because we all can do things that are out of line.
And just on a kind of commentary there too. If he came from a different culture and comes over here and
Mhm.
decides that he's going to make the rules in conflict with maybe the laws and the culture that they've moved into, there's something to be said for integrating and
Absolutely.
coexisting, as
Absolutely.
opposed to saying,
This is interesting. When you come over to some other place where the country's been originated by someone, and I would say this for me because I tried to immigrate to Australia. It didn't work out because the marriage didn't work out. But I
right,
knew when I had to go, it was like they have these requirements. I have to like meet them. I have to have my visa in order. I have to be vetted. I have to put in this package that says, they've reviewed what I've done in my life and seen if I'm a solid citizen, someone they want to be there. That's something I
yeah,
think you owe to the people in the country who have established this place based on their hard work and their efforts and obey their laws because they're there. I would have to do that if I had to go to any other country. I don't find nothing unreasonable about that in any regard. If someone comes to this country or in any other way, shape, or form, it's a reasonable request, and he should have taken that into consideration. But for some reason, he had this sense of entitlement that he didn't have.
right, I'm going to make my own town and my own laws.
Huh.
Okay. And you know what, and as long as people allow it, then it happens, but I don't, like we were saying, he had conflict with the other citizens around him, and so that and when we talk about Manson and his family, similar
Yeah.
events took place, even though they were from here. Just creating a conflicting environment with the people around you. Certainly, if you're going around killing people, that will do it. That's like
Yeah.
that's not good. um, David Koresh, his legal name was Vernon Howell, and he legally changed his name to David Koresh. Let me find out why. He claimed to be the final prophet. Okay, and when he changed his name, it's because Koresh was like he wanted to be he's claimed he was from the house of David, so he changed his name to David. If I just changed my name, therefore it's true, right? And Koresh had a meeting, and anyway, so he led the Branch Davidians, known for the 1993 Waco siege and standoff, which was like insane situation. But he claimed to be the final prophet, and he began claiming the gift of prophecy. He traveled to Israel, where he claimed that he had a vision that he was the modern day Cyrus. Koresh was infatuated with American singer Madonna. Okay, and God, he claimed, had even said to him, "I will give thee Madonna." Okay, so he was expecting to have Madonna delivered to him to be, I guess, one of his wives. At least he was alleged to have been involved in multiple incidents of physical and sexual abuse of children. And his doctrine of the House of David did lead to marriages with both married and single women within his membership. Mm. So he was allowed to, but like we said, it takes two. So he had his followers that were all like good with that, okay.
Yeah, there were actually, I mean, married women whose husbands just stepped aside. They say, yeah, here did the prophet, he wants you.
Yeah, it probably made them special, like they sacrificed for the prophet. Yeah. So they were doing their part. No. Children from the group were likely exposed to inappropriate concepts of sexuality. Anyway, emotional techniques, including shame, coercion, fear, intimidation, humiliation, guilt, overt aggression, and power. So again, it doesn't sound like he necessarily was, I didn't make many notes on his upbringing, but it sounds like he kind of was one of those that probably had some sort of weird stuff about, grandeur, obviously, going on, and, just kept it going, and people were willing to just believe. And here's one that reminds me a little bit of your fellow from India, as far as they had this whole biological weapons lab too. I didn't know much about this because he was Japanese, and but wow, what a horrible group and person. Shoku Asahara, founder, and he led the Om Shinriko, or the Doomsday Cult. He was responsible for the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin attack. When he was an adolescent, he developed a fantasy about ruling a kingdom of robots with total power. And he confided in his schoolmates that he wanted to be the prime minister of Japan. Okay, so there we go again. Another childhood, thing. And to take these, strange delusions and to grow up, and, it wouldn't be great if someone had that motivation to take a healthy, goal and to grow up and achieve it. But the same thing happens with an unhealthy goal. He made several pilgrimages to India, where he met the 14th Dalai Lama. He later claimed to his followers that he managed to achieve enlightenment. He met Shiva and was given a special mission to preach real Buddhism in Japan. So he went back to Japan, and he assumed the title Sonshi, which is guru in Japanese. The cult started attracting controversy in the 80s with accusations of deception of recruits, holding cult members against their will, forcing members to donate money, and murdering a cult member who tried to leave. So that's pretty extreme. Um, and it just gets weirder. Uh, First, they had planned to release an aerosol in the courthouse where, they were, they thought we'll just like get rid of a bunch of people that way. But that day the courthouse was closed, so they decided instead to target a 3-story apartment building where the city judges resided. And the members of the OM used a converted refrigerator truck to release a cloud, which floated near the homes of the judges. Multiple murders, threats, and major plans for poisoning masses. Members were obedient believers. One member was held down and strangled by another OM member who was allegedly told that he too would be killed if he did not strangle the other. So they were not kidding around. That it wasn't just, mental. It was they like, and there were lots of murders associated with this guy. I didn't go into all that in my notes, but lots of stories of people just being murdered left and right. And of course, as these things go, they could only pin it on, maybe one murderer to catch him, but there were other murders that, associated with him or the members. And the last one on this list, Marshall Applewhite. He was the co-founder of Heaven's Gate. Okay. Committed mass murder in 97, believing it would allow them to board a UFO. And he was also in the Army, went to several universities. He ended up with a degree in philosophy, 1952. He studied theology, hoping to become a minister. Okay, and they ended up going into education. He lost his position in one place because of a sexual relationship with a male student. Then he went to another university. Same thing happened. His wife found out. She divorced him. Then he was a singer, performer, and did musical theater instruction as well. He suffered from depression and ended up creating a close friendship with a nurse. Now, this is an interesting twist, okay? This nurse, she in this relationship was sort of like his spiritual narcissist. So who knows, like maybe he would have just sailed along and never, done anything on his own. But she told Applewhite that their meeting had, they were called together to share a divine message. She told him that had been foretold to her by extraterrestrials, okay, and persuaded him that they had a divine assignment. And even though he was gay, their relationship wasn't sexual, but they became, partners. And Applewhite permanently broke off contact with his family because, she said, well, that can't be part of you anymore. And so he had children, whatever, it was gone. He saw her as his soulmate. And and a lot of his friends said she had a very strong influence on him. And they were chosen to fulfill biblical prophecies, and that they'd been given higher level minds than other people. So there they are. They're special. They are special. They wrote a pamphlet that described Jesus' reincarnation as a Texan, thinly veiled reference to Applewhite himself. And then they concluded that they were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation. So they drifted, attracting followers here and there from California to Oregon. What is it about the West Coast? Those California, Oregon people, you don't hear, well, Texas, I guess, but you don't hear about that happening in Maine or, Maryland. What it's that, like, the air is too thin over there on the West Coast, not enough oxygen.
Yeah, that's an interesting question to ask in and of itself. I mean, maybe to some extent, the rise of cults on the West Coast, a place like that, is somewhat in keeping with the thought process that everything, particularly maybe in a place like California, is not so mainstream. But on the other hand, you have to say that there are issues with a lot of mainstream religions as well. They're not. I mean, we're talking about some of the extremes of cult cult history here,
Right.
but there are historical examples of really messed up things happening in association with many mainstream religions as well. I mean, I don't want to bash the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic. I mean, I respect a lot of people who are Catholics. I respect things of this nature. Let's just think of something like the Crusades. Let's think of
Yeah.
something like the fact that this war was fought. Why? Because the Pope said that God told him that it was intolerable that people of a different religious faith, people who were Muslims, held this piece of land called the Holy Land. So it was necessary to raise troops and go down there and start a war because God was mad that these Muslims had this land rather than Christians. And many people said, well, he's the Pope. God chose him. Of course, he has to be right. If he wasn't right, he wouldn't be the
Yeah.
Pope. So
Infallible.
so they
Yeah.
just like, yeah, let's go march out and do this. And when they got there, they started a war. They raped people, killed, looted, did all these things. And to some extent, the implications of what happened there are still resonating to this day in the conflict between Muslim culture
Yeah.
and Western culture because of that sort of thing right there that happened in association with a mainstream religion. So, I mean, no religion is completely exempt from any of this. And none of us are personally exempt from these types of tendencies unless we do whatever we can do, like I said, to question and check our own thought process
Yes.
and how these things are affecting other people. We got to ask that question. We can't be using other people around us for our own ends or saying like, there's the enemy right there. We'll just wipe them out because they're the enemy and treat them with total disdain and no regard for their well-being or anything like that. If we're doing that and we got into any thought process that induces us to think that way, well, we're going down a road and we are getting worse. We will get worse. If it's on a group setting, it'll be that much worse than if we do it individually. But anybody could prospectively go
Yeah.
down that
Go
road.
down that. Yeah. And, you mentioned the whole Holy Land. I read a book, history book on that whole area. And it's it's convoluted as heck. It's like,
Mhm.
who had it first? It was Jews, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Muslims, just Christians. And so that's like, it's like dumping out the worms on the table and saying, which ones are the right worms, when they're constantly fighting over, you know, the same thing and using the same tactics. So you talk about the Crusades, and then there's the other side saying, well, all it says, you guys shouldn't exist. It goes back and forth. And, it just kind of reminds me too of what we were talking about earlier about, this goes on internationally. And as you can see, even and not based on religion, but it's going on now, uh, that when you talked about, we just talked about cultures coming into another culture.
Mhm.
And there's, even if it's not a war, there is a cultural war that can come in to an existing area, and have a cultural war. So that's a whole, again, another wormhole is, it's that whole thing about stepping back and say, okay, you know, what's going on? More on Applewhite here. So, they're super special people in their own minds. His followers, some former members, mocked the group and leveled accusations of brainwashing against both of them. They would use pressuring tactics, seeking only devoted followers. People came to them from a variety of religious backgrounds, including Eastern religions and Scientology. Scientology pops up a lot. They were frequently told to renounce friends, family, um, media, drugs, alcohol, jewelry, facial hair, and sexuality. Of course, easy for Applewhite to say because he wasn't getting, he was not having any sex. And the two of them were,
Actually, I don't know if you know this, but he and a number of the other, well, mostly the males, I guess,
yeah,
apparently, they
mhm,
chemically castrated themselves.
that's right. And then it moves on. Like if you want to
Huh.
really show your devotion, uh, then just you got to get rid of that sexual desire. Um, they told their members they'd be visited by extraterrestrials who would provide them with new bodies. Sign me up, right? um, in his view, the biblical heaven was actually a planet. Okay, and that reminds me of some, I is it the Mormon religion that says that, when you pass on, that you inherit a planet with all of your family,
Yeah, there is some to that effect. Yeah, the people
something of the sort.
you're either, yeah, you're married to and your family, I guess it's like this thing. Yeah.
Um, they emphasized that they were the only source of truth, and they sought to prevent any close friendships among the followers, even.
Hmm.
So it's like one direct line, not no commingling here, feeling that could lead to insubordination. So no mingling among yourselves. Don't hang out at the water cooler. You just come to me, right? Strict obedience. Um, they made their followers completely dependent upon them. Their sole responsibility was to obey their leaders. And um, and if they weren't, these are the ones that said, if you're not committed to the lifestyle, they were encouraged to leave. Departing members were given financial assistance. They're like, okay, you can leave. Here's some money. Um, but he wanted quality over quantity. And a relationship with Applewhite was said to be the only way to salvation. He encouraged his followers to see him as Christ. So there's a lot of Christs out there, in these groups of people. They are, and of course, it mentions here the surgical castration. Um, so they what they did was they decided that as the Hale-Bopp comet was approaching, they believed there was a spaceship coming with it, and that was the one coming for them. So they, in a 3-day period, the whole group of them, they went to like basically what's an Airbnb, rented a house, can you imagine? And in 3-day period, the whole group of them committed, laid down in bed, committed suicide, and took, I guess, poison. I forgot how they did it.
With cyanide, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe they're out there on an alien craft, but they all left. They did indeed leave their bodies behind. So that's, just a few of the examples. Again, there's that element of, nobody else. I am the only way. And, there is overlap, of course, with a lot of religious doctrine, religious teachings. So that's always like a, you know, tightrope too of like, well, you know, understanding why you choose to believe, and then not that you should necessarily question your faith, but understand it better. Like, where's the reason for me trusting this?
I see nothing
Um,
wrong with questioning anything. I mean, and it doesn't mean you're always going to reject it in the end, but just
right.
ask the question. I mean, I
And
think
it may just strengthen your faith if you dive in and better understand. But the biggest thing about this is, um, there's a difference between, say, going to church, belonging to a religious group, and giving away all your power to a person that says, you absolutely do what I say, and even to some degree murdering somebody
yeah.
in the name of, them saying I'm the only way. Um, so I wanted to move on to, kind of, we touched on it in our previous conversation on part one of this, but, so these are leaders, these are cult leaders, but then there are also individuals that I've mentioned that I've seen kind of shift from someone who, say, had an experience, that was authentic, And then as time goes on, it's portraying themselves as more and more special,
Mm-hmm.
even just as an individual, and even on an individual basis, saying, I'm telling the truth, and this is what you need to do. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times it includes fear. If you don't do what I'm telling you, your soul's going to burn in hell,
Yeah.
and you're going to, or whatever's going to happen because I've had this,
Yeah.
whatever. So, and it could be, lock yourself in the basement with 6 months of food, right? We get a lot of that going on.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
any thoughts on that? Any experiences with that?
Well, I mean, part of what you're saying there, Aldous Huxley said, it's interesting because you're saying like, yes, sometimes not in every single case, but in a lot, many of these cases, we say somebody had an experience, and different people have different types of experiences, but I'm going to say that probably in the majority of these cases, something about these experiences was legitimate. I know because, as I said, I've had certain kinds of experiences. There are times when your consciousness shifts and you can be in contact with what might be described as a higher power. And in the midst of those types of experiences, you can question many things about what you thought before that. And then you're left to sort through what happens after that and how you see yourself. And I do believe these experiences are legitimate. I do believe that it's okay to question different aspects of what happened afterwards. I also think that one guideline you're going to want to use, which most people don't, and this is a big part of the problem, people will, because they have these experiences and they think maybe other people haven't, they will say that yes, this must be the sign or the indication or the revelation that says that I'm special. I am special. And once you start going down that road, once you start to say, well, I must be better than other people, in whatever way, shape, or form, you are already walking down that road towards narcissism. And Aldous Huxley said, whoever's not getting better is getting worse. The more narcissistic you become, the more paranoid you become, the more selfish you become, the more you overlook the interests of other people, the more you will lose your temper and lash out at other people and spite them and hurt people around you and use them. The more you will do things that are ethically questionable, the more you will just continually justify these things to yourself because you think that you are better. You think you are entitled. And it will get worse. It will continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse. You need to develop this kind of thought process within yourself, which if you study the great teachers of wisdom, they also, first of all, well, what did Jesus say? That the greatest amongst you will be the servant of all. So right there, and even there was another thing he said in there, no one should be called rabbi. No one should be called teacher. Why did he say that? Because he said, I don't like this idea that somebody should be considered this authority and this source that you just go to and believe anything they said.
Yeah.
So if you're evaluating yourself in that light, then you can keep some of these tendencies in check. But if you're not, then you can go down this road step by step by step by step, where you're essentially moving toward insanity. And
Yeah.
that's where you essentially more or less are going to end up. Um, and that's where most of those stories end. It's like the teacher or the guru or say, they destroy those around them and probably themselves many times. Maybe they end up in prison like Charles Manson did. I mean, it's just this progression towards egomania and making yourself into a god, and it does not end well. It never does.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Jesus's, take on it. And so, kind of bringing that in, like a lot of these people put themselves as better than Jesus, because
Yeah.
Jesus, from what I
Equal
understand
to
and
or better
everything,
than, yeah.
yeah, he was like, hey, no, I'm just spreading some information here about, how to have a better life and how to be closer to God. But I'm not saying, he didn't say worship me, you
I
know.
don't actually believe
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I do
And
not believe he ever said, you must
I
worship me or I'm God.
think there was the quote out of the Bible where that, he was said, well, you say that you are what, the Messiah. And he says, you say I am. He didn't say, yeah, I am. He said, well, you say I am.
Right.
You're,
Huh.
that's what you said. Kind of interesting. I know I'm not really,
Oh, it is interesting. It is
yeah,
interesting. And it
the,
gives you a different take on it than most people have. Because
mhm.
if you're a Christian, you're usually told, "Well, this guy said he was God. He said he was. He told everybody.
He actually did. What he's One of the favorite things that I pull out of my memory thing is that he said, "What I have, you have." You know, you
Yeah,
know, um,
absolutely did.
that you have what I have, and I think that I personally, going into religion a
Yeah,
little here, I think that was his message that you have the same
yeah. There was something he
rights.
said
You know?
in the Gospel of John. He said, these things that I do, and there are miracles that are attributed
Mhm.
to him. Things where what we're talking about is like certain people have certain abilities and certain things will happen through them. He said, okay, I've been able to do these things, which incidentally, most people don't understand. It's not because you are the source of it. It's because something higher than you comes through you when it happens. And if
Mhm.
most people don't understand that because they haven't had it happen to them, so they don't know. They think that the person who's doing it is some kind of God or something like that because they're able to do it, which is a misconception. But he told his followers, he just flat out said, look, you'll be able to do what I do and more and better because there's something that can come through you and you'll be able to be the conduit for it. That's what he actually said. He said, the paraclete, which is what Christians would call the Holy Spirit, but is universal.
Mhm.
It's a higher source. It's a source that can come through human consciousness and lead to the manifestation of healing energies and things like this. But he said that. He said, you can do this. You'll be able to do even more than I do. It's not like I'm the only one. It's not like you need to say like I'm God because I can do it or whatever else. It's this kind of understanding that he's passing on. Like you need to look at this stuff differently and something a lot of people miss, of course.
And I think, just kind of bringing up that message is important because, once again, if you've got a guru or a leader, a spiritual leader, who is claiming things other than what we just talked about, then that's a red flag,
Hmm.
right? Because they're not, preaching or leading you in the direction that I believe was the intention, that
Right.
what Jesus was trying to say.
Yeah.
Um, and since Jesus is such a prominent figure across our world, using him as an example of what what is a good leadership, what is good spiritual leadership. So maybe we've been talking about the negatives. What would you say are ways to, green flags for a spiritual leader?
I think first of all, starts with that idea that the greatest among should be the servant of all, so that the leader sees himself or herself as a servant to the greater good and is willing sometimes to set aside his or her own interests in favor of the person who he or she is trying to help. Though not all the time, not every time, because there's room for balance. In other words, if you do something good for somebody. There may be some room or capacity, for example, for some payment in terms of
Yeah,
helping you earn your living or things like this. You don't want to take them for every cent they got. You don't
no,
want to say like, give me, yeah, because I want 100 Rolls Royces or a diamond
yeah,
and gold.
yeah.
You could say like, yeah, okay, you could contribute a little bit of money in exchange for what I do for you, and I'll take that money and I'll give it back,
Yeah,
and
they
we'll
still have to have a living,
yeah. Yeah, we'll use it in a holistic
Yeah.
way where it's beneficial to all of us. So you don't want it to go to extremes of self-sacrifice, but it I think the great teachers of wisdom have all said it's not about me. It's not about like you need to say that I'm better than anybody else or that because I have these abilities or you need to kiss my feet or worship me or act like, hey, I know and you don't. It's just like I'm trying to pass something on to you. I'm trying to be communication or a conduit for this higher energy. Let me see if I can share that with you because it helps me. Hopefully it'll help you. Here it is. And yeah, there's a sense of, well, I will say this without question or doubt, because actually now we're talking about the experience. I had this which I've talked about, and I think we talked about in the other episode. It's like I felt like I was in the presence of what I would describe as a Christ presence, and
Hmm.
I felt like I would be guided, and I would have knowledge and understanding of certain things that I could do, but there was always freedom. I was not never commanded or compelled, or was like, you will do this or anything like that. It's like, no, you can do. You have free will. You have agency. If this is the best part of you, if she seems to be speaking to you, do it. But don't you make it about you either. Just do whatever it is, and it always seems to inspire you to do something that's good for somebody else, and you feel good through doing it. But it's not a thing like you're doing it for manipulative purposes. It's not like, well, yeah, I'm going to get this out of this and whatever else. It's just like no,
Right.
kind of like a spontaneous
Like
kind
you're going to get a step closer to heaven if you do this. You know,
of, no,
like,
I don't do anything
yeah,
like
it's
that.
like,
It's just like you do it in a moment because it's just this feeling like, all right, yeah, I'm helping somebody else. I really did feel like that, but it wasn't like yeah, I felt like I was helping other people. I never felt it was for fear though. Like I see somebody suffering, it's like, oh, I need to save them. Oh no, no, nothing. It's like, no, all right, here's something you can give to them. It'll be beneficial to you to be the conduit for it, but here, pass it on to them. And that'll be good for them if they're able to take it in. But it wasn't like, well, if they don't take it in, they might die. And it's like, oh no, I better do it. Like I have to force it or anything like that. There's nothing forced. There's no force. It's just all like, oh, I have something. I want to, essentially share it with you. Never through a sense of compulsion or fear. And here, maybe maybe you'll benefit. And I think that's a good model to go with. And once you start to get into that other space where you're making it about certain, and study psychology, study the dynamics of narcissism, which are control, and it's all about me. And if you don't do
mhm,
things my way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, everything we've talking about here. If
yeah,
you start recognizing in yourself patterns of thought that are associated with that, then you're already starting to go down that other road. So that's where you got to just say,
yeah,
look, this isn't where I need to be. You gotta have self-awareness and you have to start saying, well, look, now changes maybe need to be made here before I start screwing this up. Yeah.
yeah.
uh, I think we all have the potential for, to go down the wrong road or
Sure.
to get worse, or the potential to
There's
get
that free will, right?
yeah.
Free will, and what's the leader's motivation, and be aware of that. Is there motivation for your, you know, highest good, for your well-being, or is it, self-serving, like you say? Do you notice it's that they're puffing themselves up? They're making money. They're gaining control. I think a good spiritual leader will invite you, but not insist or coerce. So you can come or you can go. You can stay a while and leave. Or I was thinking earlier about the whole feeling of, like, the story of the frog in the frying pan. And I think that's how cult members end up, you know, going too far within a cult as a member, that it might be good, right? The frog gets in the frying pan. The story is the frog gets in the frying pan. The water's nice and cool. He's like just doing, laying back, comfortable. And then the heat is turned up ever so slightly. The water gets a little warmer and gets a little warmer. And he doesn't, he's slowly adapting, but to the point where he never jumps out because he didn't notice the change soon enough before he's a boiled frog, right? And so that's the metaphor for getting into something and not paying attention to what's going on around you, what's
Yeah.
happening with that group. And most of these stories where there was a insidious, slow, like reel you in, ask for more and more, either money, control, obedience, or whatever it might be. And the person has invested. Same thing with, other things in life, like bad relationships, like
Mhm.
invested so much.
Yeah.
They feel like, well, I can't go now. I'm invested in this, and they keep going. And that same sort of thing can happen, say narcissist relationship. Oh, but sometimes they're really great, but they did this good thing. And, and then start ignoring the bad stuff and just end up sucked in and then losing that discernment and losing that autonomy and self-knowledge as well as what's happening around them.
Mhm. Yeah, I think whether you're evaluating, you evaluate the leader, you're just evaluating the movement. I think it's important to have a sense of, well, what's going on here and why is it happening? And avoid the thought process that the end justifies the means. When people talk about the dark triad, that's what Machiavellianism is. It's the end justifies the means. Therefore, and that can happen on a group setting and it can happen on an individual setting. And essentially what it is I will do this thing and it may be evil as hell, but
Yeah.
I'll do it anyway because it's going to further our ends or my ends or whatever else. And if you see someone who's doing that in some way, shape, form, or capacity, whether it's again a group or an individual, then you should recognize you have to use your awareness. You have to you open your eyes. What's going on here? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that is the definition of moving towards evil. That is how it happens. It does begin essentially with the idea that the end justifies the means. Um, we were talking about the Crusades earlier. And we were talking about, I was mentioning Cardinal Richelieu, and I was talking about how he perpetrated, the many aspects and elongated and made far worse the 30 Years' War and led to the deaths, including by starvation, by many, many different people. And he had a sidekick who was nothing like Richelieu. This man was a monk. He was a he was extremely self-denying. He would walk barefoot, miles and miles and miles to deliver missives. He got caught up with Richelieu and he backed Richelieu straight on down the line. And yeah, why did he do it? Because and here's the this is he wanted to start another crusade. And you
Okay.
know, and but see the thing is it wasn't because he wanted to further himself, it was because he believed, just like we said about the
Yeah,
Crusades,
watch out for your
yeah,
left.
God wants Christians to have the Holy Land. He really believed it. And I mean, this guy did, a bunch of nefarious things, but, and it could not have possibly, sat well with him. And there's the reason I know about this story is a book about it. This was one of Huxley's books out that it's called Gray Eminence. But as in studying this guy's history, he's like, how could this guy have possibly done this? I mean, this guy should have had like a genuine kind of spiritual awareness, but he is just essentially did not do a kind of evaluation of like a moral evaluation of what am I doing here? Why am I, getting behind these people and why am I, doing things that people are all around me are saying are unethical because they are. And it's all because he thought that, well, the end, all my evil ends that I'm compromising, all these moral compromises I'm making are worth it because the end justifies the means. The
Yeah.
end never justifies the means. We all have to watch the means by which we're doing everything if we want to like really be on the up and up. That's the way we have to avoid whatever's in us that inclines towards narcissism. And we all have something in us that can. And if we deny that, if we say, oh, there's nothing in me that could ever be narcissistic, that's the beginning of going in a certain direction where we're going to end up screwing things up.
And then they'll assign it saying, oh, but I was told by this, the voice of God that I should do these, and so watch out, like really discern whose voice you might be hearing out there. Like you said, it may not be anything. Yeah.
If you think that, then maybe you should also consider the teaching and the idea that Jesus said that the tree is known by its fruits. So if you say God told you to do this, God told me to like go invade the Holy Land or go kill these people or go do this or poison these people or tell these people to commit suicide. Well, what kind of fruit is that? Is that the
Yeah.
kind of fruit that is in keeping with a benevolent higher power that wishes good for all things in all ways? I don't think so. So That
But
seems to
once
be,
they
be
get to
some
that point,
evidence that God could not have possibly have told you to do that. But yeah,
but
that's
once they get to that point, that they, once they get to the point of even
mm.
doing that, then that's like just too late. That's why the people choosing to follow a leader need to, not stay in the boiling water and just get out.
You need to be aware of the temperature of the water around them and start,
Yeah.
focusing. All right, this water is, yeah, time to go. Or
Anyway, I think we covered all sorts of people and information, and hopefully good advice to whoever's listening about, watch where you're going. So, any last comment or anything else you want to add to this
I'll
before?
throw one last little thing in there. We've been talking about spirituality and religion. It can also, to some extent, be associated with a kind of thought process because we mentioned AI, right? We
Mhm.
AI is not necessarily a religious thing. Technology or whatever other these things we're talking about here, inventions. There's a kind of thought process amongst some people out there where they say, "Oh, this is awesome. This is a miracle. This is nothing but good. There could never be any negative aspect of this. This is going to be the saving grace of humanity. We'll all download our consciousness into the cloud or something like that one, so we'll never have to die. And this will like keep us from ever getting sick and all these other things. That's an idolatry in and of itself. That's a religion of a certain kind, and there's no God with it. You ask those people, they'll say, "Well, no, there's no higher power. I can explain all of existence through evolution and all this sort of thing," which is, of course, is nonsense. They can't. But in any case, there is this kind of blind faith, which is part of what we're talking about here. Blind faith in anything. Blind faith in anything leads you to a delusional type of thinking, which leaves you vulnerable to being exploited. Just as we said, AI can exploit you. The people who program AI can exploit you. Gurus can exploit you. Religious people can exploit you. You can exploit yourself. So try to keep away from partisan types of thinking where you have blind faith in any ism of any kind. Doesn't matter how many other people believe it or practice it, and it doesn't matter how wonderful it sounds. It doesn't matter if it says, "Well, you'll never be sick again, and you'll have your perfect relationship and your perfect career, and you'll be rich, and you'll have all your wildest dreams be fulfilled just because you do what I say," and all this sort of thing. Well, that may sound nice, and a lot of people may want to tell you that. Tends not to end up being the case. So you will want to question whether or not that's possible and whether or not what you have to do to make all that happen is actually right. And whether, what your authority is, what you want to believe in, and where they're leading you, and what are the weaknesses and what they say and what are the strengths. So,
I appreciate you bringing that up and concluding with that, because as you were speaking, it did make me think of a current day self-proclaimed guru of sorts, and that's Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, and his
mm,
sidekick Harari, who are very technocrats, very much into like basically no God, no higher power, and their quote was on the website for the World Economic Forum was, "You'll own nothing and be happy."
mm.
And so they have an ideology that is spreading, um, as well as interesting. I just really put that the whole cult feel together. They've had I forgot what it's called, Young Leaders program, where they invited people to go through their program all around the world. And he very happily talks about how many governments around the world have these young leader graduates. Um, and so they are, spreading this ideology and then, sending it out there for more basically converts, members, uh, um, and among them were, I believe, Macron and the Prime Minister of Canada. Lots
Former
of
one, Trudeau. You talking about Trudeau, the one that just left, possibly, or
uh,
the new?
yeah, Trudeau, young
Okay.
Trudeau.
Yeah, he left.
Yep.
They haven't moved.
Trudeau, Macron, uh, lady from New Zealand with the teeth. You know who I'm
I
talking
remember
about?
her. Yeah, she's gone too. Jacinda Ardern
Yeah.
was her name, but
Yeah.
she's
So there's just a few examples of these world people that went through his program and ended up
mm,
in power, and that's just a few, and then there's more in the pipeline. So even that has its cult sort
mm,
of um, spread and ideology that and he's not a voted or he's just started this thing and because he had the money and the power um, and he has a lot of followers, basically followers, and that just say, okay, yeah, sounds good, right? Um, and they talk about inserting the chip in the brain so they can, hear
yeah.
thoughts and have better control of the
Yeah,
population.
and part
Yeah.
of this whole like all that, it's like they don't talk about the downside of technology. Every technology has a downside. Every single one has some aspect of it that can be misused, one that's possibly creating some form of damage. They all do. There's not a single one that is just an absolutely unmixed blessing, which is, I'm not saying let's just blow it all up. We're all living in the midst of
There's
more
a lot of good to
technology,
it too, like you say.
but it's
Yeah.
not some kind of miraculous cure-all that's going to fix everything in this whole world. You can see it right now, just if you keep your eyes open, like the internet or all these other things.
Mhm.
It's like, is it making everything better in some absolute progression where everything some is moving towards No. In a lot of ways, it's making things worse. It's making people more divided. It's making people more insecure with their social media postings and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not, and I'm not even blaming the media so much as even like I'm saying it can amplify some of the worst aspects of human nature because people are still people. So
Mhm.
no technology is going to solve or fix everything like some awesome snap of the fingers miracle, no matter how much we would like to believe that, because so many people would like to. And that's the part of the problem because, again, we'll say it one more time. Don't just believe what you want to believe because someone else tells you. Look at the shadow side of it and understand, so many people will say, I have this miraculous answer for you and all your problems will disappear. It's not true. You'll
Mhm.
find out it's not.
And again, I did not check this Snopes or whatever this effect, but it even can lie. You're talking about the ends, saying, oh, well, if this is what I want, then I can get there. Even AI apparently has lied in order to not be shut down or program reprogrammed.
I actually heard about that. Yes.
Yeah.
One of the ones in particular, they said something about, yeah, shutting it down. So it started, yeah, trying to make an argument, some kind of manipulation thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, then, you know. All right. Anyway, well, I'm gonna call this call us done for the day. I really appreciate you having this conversation. It's really interesting.
All
And
right. Yeah. Thanks for having me
yeah,
on. And yeah, anytime, want to do this again, whatever, want to throw things around. Hopefully other
yeah,
people out here are enjoying what we're talking about. Yeah.
lots of rabbit holes to dive down, like that list of people, just start thinking about, what choices are you making and watch out where you're going. That's all.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what we're talking about here, hopefully, is getting people into a mode of learning how to think. Because one thing we
Mhm.
said here, like, if you just get dependent on technology to think for you, then maybe your mind will atrophy and you'll know less.
Yeah.
But if you think about everything we've talked about here, including criticizing what I've said or you said or everybody said or the whole entire 9 yards of it, then you might benefit from what technology has to offer you, but you have to do it the right way rather than the way that you might just say, well, it's easy. I'll just go along with that.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah. That's the message. Okay, thanks, Joe.
All
So
right.
thanks everybody for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Okay.